This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Ayan Silver, talking with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com. Hi, J.R. The state Supreme Court race is 3 weeks away. How are you feeling?
Oh, all right. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. Okay, so on that note about the Supreme Court race, the most recent Marquette poll showed that among registered voters, 38% don't have an opinion on GOP-backed candidate Brad Schimmel, saying they hadn't heard enough about him or they don't know if they have a favorable or unfavorable opinion. Considerably more, 58%, say they don't have an opinion of Democratically backed candidate Susan Crawford. Is this unusual, JR, and what does it mean at this stage in the race? We've got 3 weeks to go.
Well, one, it's not unusual when you consider the universe of people who were sampled for that survey. So that's registered voters, right? That is not likely voters in an April election, which is a much different electorate than a November one. So one, yeah, it's not a surprise they're not very well known to the public at large. Even though millions have been spent on TV already, people just aren't tuning in sometimes as closely as maybe they had in all of 2024. But two, there's also a second look that Marquette did at the race, just with those who are very excited to vote and definitely say they're going to turn out. There, the numbers tick down for the people who don't have an opinion of them. Look, Charles Franklin, the poll director, said in the presentation that with the money being spent on TV, come April 1st, they'll be fairly well known. The question is, who's going to turn out in April to vote? Again, like I said, the electorate's different in April than it is in November. When I first started doing this 25 years ago, Republicans had a significant advantage in spring elections because the electorate trended conservative. Well, things have shifted. The more reliable voter, those who are college educated, are now more likely to be Democrats than they were 20 years ago. Part of that is due to Donald Trump. Those voters turn out every election. They are pretty reliable voters. And that's why you're seeing Brad Schimmel talk up Donald Trump so much and kind of embrace Trump, because they're trying to expand the universe of voters in spring election to bring out more Trump people. If Schimmel can do that, that improves his chances. If Crawford has the same electorate we had 2 years ago, that's a pretty good deal for her.
And what should people know about the candidates beyond what the TV ads are saying? Obviously, they're each tearing each other apart over, child sexual assault cases, things like that. What do people really need to know about these two candidates?
Well, big picture, if Brad Schimmel wins, it would flip the court back to a 4-3 conservative majority. Remember, Janet Protasiewicz won in 2023, ended 15 straight years of a conservative majority on that court. So if Schimmel wins, it's back to the way it was before. And if he doesn't win, then conservatives don't have a shot to win the majority again until at least 2028. Even then, they'd have to defend the seats of conservative Justice Rebecca Bradley in 2026 and conservative Justice Annette Ziegler in 2027. So for conservatives, this is a now or not until 2028, and only if they can defend those two seats chance. For liberals, there's definitely a big picture desire to keep control of the court, but if they lose it this time, they got a shot in 2026. So there's a little bit lower stakes for them in that regard. As for the candidates themselves, Brad Schimmel, former Republican Attorney General, started from 2014 and 2019, lost his reelection bid in 2018. Before that was a Waukesha County District Attorney. After his loss in 2018, then Governor Scott Walker, who also lost his reelection bid, appointed Schimmel to Waukesha County Circuit Court, where he served ever since. He is definitely backed by Republicans and conservatives. He has done a very good job of nationalizing this race for conservatives and getting national Republicans involved in a way that we didn't see 2 years ago. Susan Crawford, Dane County judge, elected in 2018 to that bench, former prosecutor Department of Justice under then, I think also worked under Governor Jim Doyle, definitely backed by Democrats and liberals. And if you watch the ads, they gave out all kinds of light sentences, all kinds of bad people. So it's really, I don't mean to laugh, but it's just like, we've been inundated with ads. If you were tired of ads in November, you're not getting a break in March in Wisconsin for negative TV ads.
I want to ask you about this race and the current political context nationwide. There was a protest at a Milwaukee appearance for Schimmel last month. People held signs saying that Schimmel is bought and paid for by Trump advisor Elon Musk. It said, keep Musk out of the government. Here's Christine Sinicki. She's a Democratic state representative from Milwaukee who was there.
I do believe that people that are paying attention to what's happening in D.C., they're fed up and they want to make change. And the best place to make change is right here at the local level.
And in the courts?
And in the courts, yeah.
So Democrats are trying to make the connection between what's happening in national politics and this state court race. Are they succeeding?
They're trying very hard. One thing we got to note is in this race at this point, it's like my billionaire is okay, but your billionaire is bad. I mean, don't forget, Elon Musk is pumping millions in this race to help Brad Schimmel. George Soros gave the state Democratic Party $1 million. The party then transferred a bunch of money to Susan Crawford. J.B. Pritzker gave $500,000 to the Democratic Party. So each side's incensed about the other side's billionaires, but theirs are okay. For Democrats, look, they're still kind of dispirited from November and what happened, losing the presidency, the Senate, and the House. They're trying to find a way to get their base motivated. If you look at the Marquette Law School poll results from last week, Elon Musk is a polarizing figure. So is Donald Trump. One way to get your base engaged is to get them kind of upset about things and realize they're not happy about what's going on in Washington, D.C. So much like Schimmel's nationalized this race to get national Republicans involved, Crawford and Democrats trying to nationalize it on the other side to kind of be, hey, if you're unhappy about what happened in November, Democrats and donors, you should get involved here. Here's your first chance to push back and send a message nationally because, look, swing state, Wisconsin, purple state, if Susan Crawford wins in April, that could be kind of the first message that we heard around the country of, hey, there's something going on and they're starting to push back against Trump. Maybe the base is getting itself, Dem base is getting itself kind of organized and ready to go again.
And one of the things that you've talked about that might be a highlight for Democrats is the fact that the electorate has changed a little bit, and it seems like higher income, higher levels of education voters who turn out for more elections like this might be trending more democratically. I asked Brian Schimming, the state GOP chair, about whether he thinks liberals have an advantage in a race like this one, and this is what he said.
I might have said that before, but I was the first state chair in the country to push early vote amongst Republicans. And so I think what has happened, particularly in the November election, is a lot of more conservative voters who might not have voted early before, or they weren't used to doing it, have crossed the bridge.
So what are your thoughts on this? How else are Republicans and Democrats, for that matter, trying to turn voters out?
Oh, people are on doors. They're sending text messages. You're getting hit with, if you look at YouTube videos, you're going to get like some ads on your feed. If you're on social media, you'll see stuff like they're just finding any way to motivate the base. And for Republicans, they want to bring the Trump voter out. The challenge for Republicans has been that there's been a realignment with voters and where they're at. And the Republican Party has become much more of a populist, blue-collar-based party. Those folks, one, don't turn out as often or as frequently as college-educated voters do. And two, the base is really a Donald Trump base anymore. And we've yet to see real evidence that the Trump voter turns out when Trump is not on the ballot. If you go back to 2016 and go through the elections in Wisconsin, it's only a handful of Republican wins without Trump on the ballot, right? Brian Hagedorn won the Supreme Court race in 2019. 2022, Ron Johnson won re-election. John Lieber won the treasurer's race. But for the most part, those statewide elections since 2016 without Trump on the ballot have been won by Democrats and or progressives. So, there's an issue there for Republicans. They want to get that Trump voter engaged. They have to try and figure a way to tell those voters, hey, this matters too, which is why you're seeing ads that try to say that if Crawford wins, it would, perhaps flip control of the House and then lead to Trump's impeachment. You're seeing mail pieces talking about Trump and this could, hurt his agenda. They want that voter, Republicans, they want that voter engaged and turn out. We just haven't seen it happen, though, without Trump on the ballots. It's going to be a huge, huge push for Republicans to try and get those voters motivated.
You're tuned into Capitol Notes. I'm WUWM's Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com. Okay, so there's another statewide race on the ballot this April 1st for state superintendent of public instruction. 64% of registered voters lack an opinion of incumbent Jill Underly, and 71% haven't heard enough about her opponent, Brittany Kinzer, according to the Marquette poll. What can you tell us about this race?
Well, one, nobody's paying attention to it. And there's a reason why. I mean, look, the Supreme Court race has got millions of bucks up on TV already. So with Susan Crawford and Brad Schimmel, if they're not that well known to voters, they probably will be by April 1st. Joe Underly and Brittany Kinzer don't have that kind of way to break through the clutter. They're also get drowned out. If you think about it, there is a budget in the state capitol, all kinds of noise coming out of Washington, D.C. For example, the U.S. Department of Education, Trump wants to eliminate that, right? So there are all these things that are kind of getting people's attention. The DPI race is not one of them. So how do Kinzer and Underly break through that clutter? Or are their fates tied basically to the Supreme Court race, i.e., if Susan Crawford wins, then Joe Underly wins because they're both kind of considered left-of-center candidates. If Brad Schimmel wins, then Brittany Kinzer wins, right? Because they're both backed by right-of-center interests. It may not be that simple, but that might be what drives it. All kinds of complicating factors. Does Kinzer have crossover appeal, for example, right? She's backed by Republicans and those who support school choice, at least financially, but she attended the Democratic National Convention in 2024. So does she have some crossover appeal? Underly is backed by the education establishment. Those voters turn out for DPI races, guaranteed. So does that give her an advantage? And two, will there be a drop-off from the Supreme Court race to DPI because people don't know who these two are? It's a huge wild card in the race. We often see in Wisconsin and around the country, if there are several high-profile races on a ballot or one overshadows the other, there's a drop-off, just like in the presidential race. More people vote for president than for U.S. Senate almost every year. Why? Just because people pay more attention to the presidential race, right? Likewise here, there'll be a drop-off from the Supreme Court race at DPI that could hurt or help one of the other candidates.
For people who don't really know what the state superintendent does, the position directs federal funding, teacher licensing across the state, deals with educational policy in the state. Anything else?
Well, and the office is somewhat hemmed in because lawmakers control the purse strings, right? Like they're the ones who, in the end, set the law and how much is being spent with obviously input from the governor. The state superintendent has some strings that he or she can pull within those confines, but there's some limits to what they can do in that department. It's sometimes more of a bully pulpit trying to advocate for various education policies.
And if you were going to give people a snapshot of each candidate, what they stand for in like 2 sentences, what would it be?
Joe Underly, kind of a traditional education establishment-backed state superintendent, very much believes in more money for public schools, isn't seen as a school voucher advocate. Brittany Kinzer, education consultant, kind of trying to push I can walk a line here and be bipartisan when it comes to education. All I care about is improving reading scores for kids and their education. Backed by school choice folks and seen as the one who would be most open to expanding the voucher program.
I see. Okay. And then, I kind of wanted to ask you to start a new little segment. It's going to be called What is JR Watching in the Legislature? And I'd like to ask you, what's one thing you are currently watching for in the state legislature?
What's going to happen with right of first refusal? Now, this bill does not matter to anybody who's more than a block away from the Capitol. However, it is the most lobbied piece of legislation in the Capitol. It's fascinating. So what it means, they call it ROFR for short, right of first refusal. There is an operation that oversees transmission lines in the 14-state region. It's called MISO. They've approved a bunch of new projects to improve reliability and the transmission of power in the region. About $1.8 billion is coming to Wisconsin for work. Right of first refusal means that incumbent utilities would have their first shot to build these new transmission lines. It has split Republicans badly in the legislature because there's two arguments here. One, the people supporting it say if you pass this law, it would allow you to spread the operational costs of new lines across the entire region that benefits from them. So now no matter who builds it, you can spread out the construction costs, but the operational costs, advocates say, would go across a wider region. The opponents say, hey, this thing is anti-competitive. You're giving utilities a monopoly. You'd actually lower costs more if you had a competitive bidding process up front, and then the projects would come in, for less. Again, this is not the sexiest thing in the world. but is the most intensely lobbied bill I've seen in a long time. And the people involved are the heaviest of heavy hitters in the Capitol. What's fascinating is with the split in the Republican parties, Devin Lemonhew, the Senate Majority Leader, has to decide, will he accept Democratic votes to pass that bill? Because there are not 17 GOP votes in his caucus to pass that bill. Lemonhew said, yeah, he'll rely on Democratic votes. He's okay with that. He's a big proponent. Over in the Assembly, Robin Vos, would he do it with Democratic votes? Now, he's got a 54-45 GOP majority. People in charge of the legislature, the houses, tend not to want to use votes of minority to pass things. It emboldens them to ask for stuff, number one. And two, it can hurt your party cohesion if you're going around some of your members and using Democrats to pass things with the minority party. So there were a dozen Republicans in the Assembly who registered opposition to this bill during a public hearing last week. What's Robin going to do? This is not the sexiest thing for the average person, and it matters very little to your bill probably in the long run. But this is like total Capitol intrigue. How are they going to get this bill passed? What are they going to do? Will it die this time? Talk Radio Milwaukee has now gotten involved and is ripping Republicans to support it. Americans for Prosperity is a lobbying group here in the Capitol. Does a lot of doors and stuff in campaigns. They're against it. Utilities are for it. It's got all kinds of Capitol intrigue. And again, if you get one of the block from the Capitol, nobody cares what's going on with it.
Well, it's super funny because when I went to do a totally different story, and I spoke with Dan Knodel, who's a Republican from Germantown, and there were some lobbyists knocking on his door about ROFR, and his clerk was talking to me about it. And so even in that short, half-day stint that I spent in the Capitol, ROFR was already a thing. I'm just wondering about it. You were talking about it. It's kind of like whether you support what's potentially a monopoly for the utilities to get a first shot at things or competitive bidding. Where do Democrats stand, and how would the bill impact like the average consumer?
So Democrats are, they're kind of been open to it. They kind of like some of these things in here, in part because, unions like it. There would be some construction work here, right? Coming to Wisconsin. There's also an argument that it's better to have Wisconsin companies building Wisconsin lines using Wisconsin workers, right? That's part of their pitch. So Democrats are pretty on board. Not all of them, for sure. But for the average person, the question is, how does it impact your bill? That's all people care about. And during the testimony last week, one of the proponents said, look, transmission is like 1.5% of your bill overall, and this would have a minor impact on that very small part of your bill. So I don't know it's going to drive prices either way. There are bigger factors involved, right? How we generate electricity, tariffs that Trump's talking about, those things are going to impact you probably more than this will. But, there's a lot at stake for the utilities, and there's a principle at stake as well for the opponents about how we do things in Wisconsin when it comes to bidding these projects. It is the palace intrigue right now. That and will they pass a budget and when? Those are the two big palace intrigues in the Capitol right now.
All right. As always, thanks for the background, JR, and thanks for joining me on Capitol Notes.
Anytime.
That was JR Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com, speaking with me, WUWM's Maayan Silver. Listen for our segments every other Monday with an extended segment on lake effect, and check out the Capitol Notes podcast wherever you get your podcasts.